So we're at August 30th, which is Wednesday, August 30th, 2023. As always, I recommend listening at either 1.5 or 2 times speed. That day, by that point, my mom came back to my apartment. And, by that point, I'm going to be honest that I was already scared. Like, I needed to have her not be in my apartment with me because of some of her behaviors that stand to put me in danger. Behaviors that would be fine if it was a normal person, obviously, who's not being stalked and raped. But, then at the same time, I'm scared for her safety, her going to a hotel. Again, something that's totally legal and fine, and it should never be on the victim to, quote unquote, not stay in hotels. We live in a free country. It should be on the attackers to stop stalking and raping. So I had her come back to my apartment. At that point I was already scared for her safety, knowing how these people work and knowing what had happened on the vacation in August. Of course, she's still convinced that we weren't raped, just like most people would be. Nobody thinks this whole thing, nobody thinks that anyone would be this determined or this thorough. If it happened to you listening, you might not know it. And certainly a lot of the people around you would not believe it. That's how this thing goes. Because of the organized nature of it, most people live rather individualized lives, at least compared to the organized, coordinated crime that these people are engaging in. So I took her car. Again, I'm in a situation where among my family, I'm the one who knows what's going on here. I took her car. I took the keys. It was Wednesday. And that morning, I said to myself, after having realized that this Italian man was definitely sent to contain me / associated with the organized criminal syndicate responsible for rape trafficking me, I reminded myself of the resolve that I told myself I had to have while we were on that vacation in August at that last location, the one we were at for a week and a half, where the whole cabin neighborhood was empty except us. And I knew I was powerless in that situation. Didn't have access to a car. My mom wouldn't let me drive it, knowing that if I went to the local police, my mom wouldn't even, that my mom's testimony would not help, or, that she denies that this has happened, like many people would, knowing the cards are stacked against me, feeling as if I would literally be shot and murdered if I were to go to the local police in Tennessee, because remember, they drove by. One of my attackers or someone associated drove by shooting a gun off later in that trip when it became clear that I was guarding the house at night. So I had legitimate reason to fear for my life. So anyways, and especially with stuff like this where the local police unfortunately are more likely to be in on it, I felt I had to go to the highest authority possible. I didn't know much about who is who and who's above the FBI at the time. So, anyways, yes, I reminded myself as I was sitting there the night of August 29th, that Tuesday night, realizing that Italian man was in on it. I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I reminded myself of the resolve that I had told myself I would have to have, and the way I prepared myself for what was to come when we were on that trip, that I was going to do anything it took to protect myself and my mom. And again, because of these people's actions, they've made it clear that they're not going to stop until they face consequences, which is why I had to go the route of going back to the FBI. So I decided, okay, if I'm going to do this, I have to do it right. The way that things stood at that time, I was sure, I was able to predict how these things go. Well, once I figured out that the Italian man was in on it, I knew for a fact that the protest history was going to be used against me. I knew that it probably already had been, and that's why they made me stay and give my testimony in the foyer, which I'm sure they don't do to a lot of victims of violent crime. And he works with these people every day. This Italian man, who clearly is a member of this syndicate, he works with these people every day. They're familiar with him. So even though he's wrong and he's a racketeer and he's associated with pimps and part of a pimp organization, he has that familiarity to be able to say little things to turn the FBI against me, or whatever line of communication I have to get in touch with legitimate government intervention. So I told myself, if I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do it right. I'm not going to give him the chance to turn them against me, because if I just left things as they were and didn't show up again, it would have certainly just trailed off. It already trailed off the first time, never heard back. And especially now that there's already an inside guy to turn them against me, hell yeah, it would have trailed off. And at the time, especially with so much gang stalking, people physically stalking me within my neighborhood, a lot there. I'll dedicate a few minutes just specifically to the gang stalking during this week of August 29th to whatever the end of the week is, I guess Friday. I'll dedicate a few minutes just to the details of that. But yeah, especially with the gang stalking ramping up, because remember, they have an inside guy. So now they know I've been to the FBI, even though I went out of my way to not take my phone, to use transportation that was less likely to be tracked. Now they definitely know I went to the FBI because they have an inside guy to report back to them that I've done this. Not to mention, they probably had someone else following me when I did that as well. So anyways, I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. I'm going to go back today. I'm not going to wait, I'm not going to wait for my safety. My immediate safety cannot wait for the usual bureaucracy that it takes to investigate things. My life is at risk at this point, and it certainly was. I went back. I said, I'd like to speak to someone, preferably the human trafficking contact. The very important detail about this is that the Italian man was not working that day. It was two other guards working for Paragon. And so, I waited probably 5 or 10 minutes. This was early in the morning that I showed up. And Desiree came down. In general, she was great. We sat there for a second, and then I didn't go into detail at that time, but I asked, can we go up to the building? I'm not going to take too much of your time today, but if we can please go up to the building, I'd really appreciate it. We went up to the building. She made it clear to me that she had already read through the notes, both from April 28th, from the Houston field office, and that she had reviewed the notes from Chase from the day prior. So, and she was like, I couldn't get here fast enough. Like, I got to work and then you were already here. So I spent that time telling her some key details that I had not brought up yet. Specifically, the Israel specific thing from, the night of April 20th. I had already gone into that, but I had not remembered his name at the time. So I brought up his name. I brought up the fact that I have significant reason to believe that they tried to put drugs in my car, that I never found anything, but that, that stalking, as it coincided with them trying to use me as some kind of drug mule, based on the stalking, was a huge part of how I figured out that the rape had even happened. Well, I also told her at that time that Gil Lopez had told me that he had been born into the Bonanno crime family. And I went into detail about, yes, that could potentially be a lie, but based on what I have figured out about his psychology, I don't think it was a lie. So it was kind of me giving her some important details that I had, I spent that night thinking of what I had not given to the FBI yet. So I went and did that. She and I probably talked for 10 or 15 minutes. And then I left. And one important thing is that they both Chase and her had said, you need to reach out to counseling services or something like that. When Chase said that to me, I was like, look, at this point, I'm going to do what y'all say just for the fact of trying to work with y'all or, figure out how to make this constant stalking and rape stop. When she brought it up the next day, by that point, I was kind of like, I've always been anti-psychiatry. Let's be clear about that for me personally. But psychiatry gets used against witnesses, victims of organized crime, victims of the three-letter agencies. I also want to be clear that right now I'm giving my testimony from the perspective of my level of consciousness at the time that it was happening. Obviously, at the time that I'm going to the Charlotte FBI field office, I'm not aware of the fusion centers. I'm not aware of the extent to which the FBI is in on it. Now, I already knew there were a couple people, or I had my suspicions. But I will say that I did have a chance at legitimate government intervention. The fact that the traffickers came down on me as hard as they did during this period and after shows you that I had a chance at legitimate government intervention. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone out of their way to falsely imprison me, etc. It's a faction within every agency. This rape trafficking thing and the people who are aware of the rape trafficking, and then another outer intermediary circle of people who may not be necessarily aware of the rape trafficking and the physical rape and creation of rape pornography based on the rapes, but who do the bidding under guise of terrorist watch list, what have you. I will say there's a lot more people who are aware of the rapes and in on the rapes than most people would think. Sorry to get off topic. So I left the FBI field office again. She asked me, so I was saying about the counseling. By that time, she was like, well, you should reach out to a counselor. I was like, look, the fact that I think that they're trying to kill me, it's not anxiety on my part or anything like that. It's literally logic. I push back on it. And I want to be clear that on an individual basis, it's not necessarily evidence of racketeering, right? The fact that someone suggests psychiatry or counseling to some extent is not evidence of racketeering. Now, I want to be clear, she was not necessarily suggesting psychiatry. She was suggesting a counseling service. That's not necessarily evidence of racketeering. It's how the system works. It's how people view trafficking victims or anyone who's been through this. There's a lot of it that's wrong, even when the intentions are innocent. I'm getting into opinions again, but I have to, because this is part of the reason we're not getting a full picture of what's happening to trafficking victims. There's a few different things wrong with it. For one, it views this as something that's in the past. We need to help you process your trauma. No, this is still happening. That's why I'm still advocating for myself and why I have a sense of urgency, because the stalking hasn't stopped. And I know they're going to rape me any chance they get. That's the sense of urgency. It comes from something material. It doesn't come from something mental. Anyways, I did push back at that time. She asked me, she said, because when I showed up, I asked to speak to Chase, because by now I had learned to try to stay in contact with the same people, because I'm going to get the bureaucracy anyway, so let me try to keep the same thread running or whatever. And she did ask me, she said, did he tell you that Desiree is going to be the human trafficking contact? And when I answered her question, I said, He did tell me that it was going to be someone human trafficking. I knew it was a female's name, but I didn't remember which name he said, which is true. I left that day. The gang stalking in my neighborhood continued. I know I went to sleep after that visit on Wednesday. Taking a pause and I'll continue.